This piece is called Kill the Messenger. And it starts with a quote by Marshall McLuhan that I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. The medium is message. And I think you'll catch on pretty quickly to the structure of the piece. 1. Here is the first book that taught you women and Indians were just accessories for the protagonist, barely human enough to be proper foils. An old paperback of how the West was won by that asshole Ronald Reagan prototype, Louis L'Amour. Also, a rusting pair of swinger sewing scissors. Take your time. 2. Here is the silver Panasonic radio that announced the war. The first time you ever heard the emergency broadcast system croon its monotone disaster serenade for a lover other than a hurricane. Here is a framing hammer. 3. Here is the billboard on the side of a high-rise that promised you cigarettes would make you stronger. Wanted. Here is an 8.6 earthquake. 4. Here is the television set that trained your entire generation to sit still and watch. Here is an axe. 5. Here is the pamphlet handed to you by eager Christians with mullets trying to rack up saved souls like camel dollars. The illustrated pamphlet that told you any deviation from the body of Christ, that any instinct to buck the existence authorities would land you in hell permanently. Here is a box of matches that say, appropriately, we think, merci. 6. Here is the old biplane, a de Havilland tiger moth, we believe, responsible for writing, "Will you marry me, Holly," in the sky that Saturday at the water, the day you realized he didn't really love you and never would. Here is an M26 hand grenade. 7. Here is the painting that made your heart want, that opened the door a crack to the humming, pulsing, pulling room of the possible. Here is 100 years of harsh sunlight. 8. Here is the letter your father wrote and mailed you before he tried to kill himself. Here is a brass locket big enough to contain its folded legs. Here is an ocean. 9. Here is the song that forced itself down your throat when you were at your weakest, the one that wrote you all wrong. It still throbs in you, an alarm clock grinding its gears when the dark rings. Here is your voice. When my father began selling off his things, he put off unloading the Steinway baby grand piano as long as possible and had the decency to call me when it was time. He was practiced at postponing disaster. It was the highest ticket item he had, and I knew how badly he needed the money, so it meant something. The sign of a great piano is how quietly you can play it, is what he told me when he bought it, when he was at the summit of his happiness and self-philanthropy. He had this gleam in his eye back then when he was entertaining guests that I mistook for joy. He would brandish the glossy black back of it like a pet whale, like an endangered species he had become close friends with. He would be sure to point out where Henry Z. Steinway, great-grandson of the patriarch himself, had signed it, just inside the haughty curve of its hip. What is hubris, anyway, if not the signal of great imagination, of someone who has let the truth self float up like a hot air balloon? What would you jettison to stay in the soft, bright clouds just one more day? At the time, I was still in love with my father, the way children are. The dark growth of his mistakes was what was weighing everything down now. And I wanted his weakness to bring out something gentle in me. Even though I had learned the pathétique on this piano, even though I had scaled its fingers with my fingers nearly every day for 7 years, even though I could close my eyes while seated at any table, see the keys take their positions like dancers on a chessboard and play the blank wood perfectly, I told him, "It's okay, Dad. It's just a thing." Then placed the phone back on its cradle, my eyes burning, my hands shaking, my heart hammering out the song that isn't a dirge, but how a dirge begins in the mind of the composer when she is still trying to get a handle on the shape of it, the swelling, changing shape of the loss. They say if 100 people were witnesses to the shootout, there will be 100 different versions of what happened that day. 102 if you count the shooters, which you do, and 104 if you count the guns, which you don't, not yet. If you gather all these stories and weave them together, you will come as close as you can come to seeing what God sees. But the weaving is tricky. You have to memorize the angles of sight. You have to interview each witness separately and learn their entire life story. Why did witness 35 assume the shooter, the first one, started the whole thing? Did he look like the brother she lost? Did the other shooter blink, or did she blink when the clouds sifted and the sun flashed briefly? Each telling will be a cumulative telling of 1,000 other stories. It would be best if you could start at the beginning. Talk to the families of the witnesses in their childhood homes, their first lovers. It would be better still if you could teach them all to play the piano, record and analyze how they approach Beethoven's sonatas or the blues of Memphis Slim, the way music pours out of you. It's a form of lie detector test, if there is no such thing as lying. Time itself is another angle, distorting everything. If you want to get to the whole truth, just keep layering dimension upon dimension. Undo the tapestry when it gets tangled and start over. Use string and feathers and whatever clocks you have on hand. They say every writer has one story to tell, and they tell it over and over and over, trying to get it right. Or not right, but perfect. The way God would tell it. If God came out of the cage of your body long enough to draw breath and sing. Maybe that's why I'm still here in this growing mountain of paper, furiously taking down notes. I don't need them anymore. It's only important that I write them down because I learn through writing things down. For example, I'm writing, "Don't forget to ask the guns." Important. Now I'll remember for sure. Tomorrow morning, I'll shovel a tunnel through the stacks of pages and start to work getting the perspectives of objects. I could just start a fire, burn the stories to create a pathway out. It would be easy. But then there would be all that smoke. It would obscure the whole scene. I might miss the final, most crucial detail, the one that ties this all together with one big bang.